Hi everyone, this is Cristina Villegas. I'm your local resident ASM expert, and we're broadcasting live today for Columbia University's massive open online course, MOOC. And today we have some questions put forward by the students. We have one question from this cohort, and then we have a few questions from the last cohort that I wasn't able to answer because I was traveling. So let's go ahead and get started. The first question is, Ghana's new government is insisting on stopping local artisanal miners, popularly known as Galamsey. What can the government do to accommodate this huge number of locals who live on this form of mining in the economy? So normally I would want to get some background information about what the government of Ghana has already done. And just to be clear, I have not been to Ghana. I don't know everything about the situation. I know that Ghana has some beautiful diamonds, chocolate, and gold. But let's take this as a hypothetical for any country that's coping with artisanal mining in the rural areas and don't know how to respond. So the first step is to cope. So to make artisanal mining less bad, you want to have people come out and teach people how to be safe. I know this might appear as condoning the behavior, but artisanal mining can be really dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. And oftentimes new miners do not know what they're doing. They usually learn the same wrong way from their neighbor. And they might not be wearing face masks, helmets, just very basic personal protective equipment called PPE. So that's the first thing I recommend for a response. The second thing is more a medium to long-term action, and this is to determine why people are getting into artisanal mining in the first place. Why this rush? Was there a shock of some kind? Did crops fail? What is the root cause of this influx into artisanal mining? And then start to address those, because mining is hard. It's hard work. If you're working in a surface deposit, you're out in the sun all day long, and it's really not for everyone. So artisanal mining can be a desperation activity. People might not want to stay. Other people might like it and want to make a business out of it. But those folks who are in it out of desperation, it's really important to understand what drove them and then begin to address those root causes. In the long term, if this is a long-term shift in the economy, the government really ought to focus on formalization, so helping people become fully legal, and also professionalization, helping people learn the correct methods, learn how to manage their environmental and social impacts, and really get more of what they're mining with less harm. And Ghana, for example, has a number of very large-scale companies that they're mining gold and other things. So it might be a really interesting opportunity to test whether artisanal miners and large-scale miners can coexist in the same concession, or whether artisanal miners and small-scale miners can become service operators to the larger mines, and really help think about how artisanal mining can be a really great thing for the economy. So those are my kind of initial reactions to that question. I'd be happy to go to Ghana if anybody wants me to go. I know PACT has a small project right now there. So I'm always happy to have a longer conversation with the government on precise response options based on my experience. The next question is from the last cohort of students. It says that small-scale mining communities are vulnerable to communicable diseases. And separately, they're also vulnerable to issues like child labor as well. What can be done? Well, oftentimes people don't necessarily know what kind of diseases they might be facing. For example, it might be obvious from the standing pools of water that malaria might be an issue, but it might not be obvious that HIV might also be an issue long term because of influx of sex workers. What also might not be obvious is things like dust diseases that are kind of invisible. They tend to be invisible for the first 5 years. And then people start getting sick and then more susceptible to TB and other diseases that prey on a weakened body. So some of the things that can be done are education campaigns for the obvious and not so obvious. This is not a cut and paste exercise, so you want to understand what people are aware of, what they're currently doing, what language they speak, what their literacy levels are, what other local services might be available, such as a local clinic, local hospitals, Ministry of Health activities that you can build upon or help them engage with the minors on. So you want to see what's already there, and then what local languages are in use, and then have people, whether they're staff, volunteers, just champions, people who really care strongly about an issue, go out and engage communities with respect and in their own language. You can use cartoons to kind of reinforce key messages. You can use posters, laminated posters so that they don't get wet. You can use community theater to kind of show the connection between mining and getting sick and to be more memorable. With child labor, I can't remember if I actually talked about this in my session, but we tend to see child labor come up in 3 different forms. The first form is children mining within a family unit. So a mother might not be able to afford childcare in the migrant town. They bring their kids on site, and the kids eventually start mining along with them. I've seen some 3-year-olds who are expert panners, and this kind of begins like a slippery slope. That 3-year-old might start digging and eventually become an excellent miner himself or herself. So in the second group of children, we tend to see our teenagers. They might have started a family already. They might be mining after school, or they might drop out of school because of mining's an income. And then the third group is unaccompanied minors. So they might be true orphans, but they're with a third-party adult. And that can become a really predatory situation very fast. So I mentioned the 3 kind of categories. They're kind of broad categories. There can be exceptions here and there. I mentioned them because it's really important to recognize that when you say child, under international law, is anybody under 18. But if you ask a 16-year-old if they're a child and have 2 kids already, they're going to look at you and really, tell you where to go. So I mentioned these categories because each group requires a different response. So there's a lot of different things that we're learning. If you go to pactworld.org and you search child mining, you can see some of the reports that we've done that talk about some of the response options. But if you want some more guidance on the topic, I'll be back at my desk in June 2017. I'm always happy to talk more about this if somebody is working on this in their community. My computer is about to lose batteries, so I'm going to pause and come back again with your other questions. Hi everyone, I'm back. Thank you for accommodating that brief pause. All right, so the next question. It has to do with helping artisanal and small scale miners access credit sources, especially for developing countries. Right, so oftentimes, because ASM work outside of the formal economy, they are not eligible for traditional bank loans, nor would a lot of banks kind of know how to deal with them. A lot of banks aren't mining experts, and so just because someone's standing next to a tunnel saying there's gold in there doesn't mean that that's actually true. And so a lot of banks kind of struggle with the risk and kind of unknowns and also bad reputation of the mining sector. So it's really important to kind of recognize that, but also recognize that artisanal and small scale miners are being financed by someone. It might be the local shopkeeper, it might be the local big man or big woman. Or someone else, someone bigger and possibly scary. So it's always important to also understand who you might be displacing when you start getting involved with credit. But it's a really great question. So there's a number of options. The first is kind of more strategic. So to solve the problem of artisanal miners not being able to access formal credit sources, one first response is formalization. I remember I had one really big bank approach me in Southern Africa, and they said, "Hey, Cristina, we keep getting approached by artisanal miners for loans, but we can't give to them even if you wanted to because they're illegal. Is there a way we can help make them legal?" And I said, sure, if the government's on board, sure, we can do anything. And so that was one really interesting way the banks were acknowledging that these can be really exciting rural entrepreneurs, but the main issue was their legality. In that case, the government was not quite ready to make that step towards legalization, so we couldn't make a project there. But I thought that was really strategic by that bank to approach us to see if we could help in that case. If the government's not ready to do something, we can't force anyone to do anything, especially if they're a government. The second way you can respond to this is educating banks and microcredit facilities on the realities and opportunities of ASM. Things that they can do to kind of lessen their risk, such as a geological report about what a certified geologist says is in that soil, so that they know that that miner is correct, or if he or she is not correct. So there's things like that. And then there's also something interesting that we've been trying a bit in Ethiopia, which is economic savings groups. We're also trying this in DRC as well. And the idea is in places where artisanal miners and small scale miners are going to be there for a long time, so not rush situations, but more community-based mining, you can create a savings culture. And kind of like a village savings and loan fund where people learn to save together and then they make loans to each other. So the downside of this is that oftentimes mining equipment is really expensive. So it won't pay for a $100,000 tractor, but it might be able to pay for a new compressor, for example, and that person pays back the fund with the agreed upon interest. That's something that needs support usually, but there's a number of organizations that operate these kind of things. It's pretty rare for the mining sector right now, but we are doing a lot of learning at my current organization on how to do this well. And so watch that space for some lessons learned. All right, the next question has to do with when do we consider market-facing approaches, and how much of these approaches are inclusive of the African consumer? This is a really good question. So it's always important to understand that someone is buying material from the artisanal or small scale miner. If they were not, that person would not be digging. So someone is buying it. Not all materials are well suited for ethical, so-called ethical initiatives like fair trade or fair mind or diamond development initiative or things like that. These are kind of usually for high value materials. For example, I don't think there's a market for ethical salt, for example. There's a market for ethical gold. These more premium-based markets might not be appropriate for everyone. So there's kind of two things you can do. The first is focusing on more buyers. If a miner is able to sell to more buyers or has more buyers that they can get access to, their negotiating position gets better. It's also really important to understand that just because there's more buyers available does not necessarily mean that miner can sell to them. For example, if that buyer is also a financier of that mine site, that miner might have an agreement with that buyer that only that buyer can buy from him or her. So just because someone walks up to my site, I can't necessarily sell to them because I might have a previous agreement with the buyer. This is really common. So before you engage a mine site, you should understand who is paying for the equipment. If there's a pre-financing situation already there, because that might limit some opportunities for market-facing approaches. And there are other things you can do. So that's the first step, is possibly trying to figure out a situation where more buyers can buy from that individual. And you can also work with the individual on mine site conditions, on quality, on how to engage with buyers, things like that, that will open up more buyers to him or her. Some of the quality standards, things like that. The other thing you can do, the other area where a market-facing approach might be appropriate is with some of these higher value materials. So gold, diamonds, gemstones, things like that. There's already a consumer base that's buying that. And so my advice is to contact the owners of these initiatives. So Fair Trade Gold is run by Fair Trade out of the UK. They have a gold program. Fair Mind is owned by the Alliance for Responsible Mining. It's ARM. And find out how you can link up with these initiatives, how you can help miners reach these high standards or their entry-level standards. Because they probably have how-tos on how to get different mining units into their pipeline. They're always looking for more supply to meet the demand that they've created. And then how much of these approaches are inclusive of the African consumer? This is a really great question. I've been doing a lot of thinking about this because I see where it's coming from. I remember I was in Malawi about 2 years ago, and I was at a gem shop there, just making small talk with the owner, and I was asking, "Oh, do artisanal miners sell to you? How many? What are they selling? What's the quality like? For you as a buyer, are they giving you what you want, what you need?" And then I was asking, "Oh, what's selling?" And he said, "I've been trying to sell Malawian gemstones as an engagement ring or things like that, but everyone wants diamonds because they associate diamonds with the wedding industry and things like that." And I thought that was a real shame because Kenya, Malawi, Tanzania, Nigeria, Ghana all produce beautiful colored stones, and wouldn't it be very interesting to have African consumers buying African colored stones. That's one of my dreams I'd love to kind of help someone get started with. But I just thought it was a shame that, in Malawi, they're buying stones from elsewhere for engagement rings and wedding rings, and not necessarily Malawian stones. So next question, and it's the last question. So if you have more questions, just email the administrators of this MOOC, and maybe I can fold it into the next cohort's questions if you didn't get a chance to ask your burning question. Okay, so the last one. Many formalization initiatives tend to focus on the minors. Are there any known approaches for integrating the middleman dealers of a supply chain, especially when the mine-to-market solution would threaten their livelihood? This is a really excellent question. So yes, it's true that if you leave the middleman out or the middlewoman out, you are leaving out a really important stakeholder. In fact, if you leave them out of a mine-to-market initiative, your initiative will probably fail, to be quite honest, because those middlemen and women were there before you, and they'll be there after you. And if you don't include them, they become your spoilers. And there's every reason why they would want to have you fail, or have you arrested, or it becomes a safety issue too. So yes, there are a number of initiatives. All the ones that I've mentioned before: Fair Trade, Fair Mind, Diamond Development Initiative, and there's also one called ITSCI that PACT implements for the tin and tantalum industries. They all incorporate the middle person because they have to, recognizing that nothing will happen unless you actually engage the people who are buying from the miners and making that supply chain work. The other part of your question about how do you engage these individuals when it might threaten their livelihoods. Just like working with artisanal miners, you also have to make it a good thing for the traders as well. So there also has to be financial benefit for them. So they also need to be rewarded for good behavior. So any kind of monetary benefits that they can get is great. I remember I did some work in West Africa once a few years ago, and the government really wanted to exclude one very large gold trader because this person was very dodgy. I said, well, if you want this initiative to succeed, you have to include him or you have to at least give him the opportunity to become legal. Because if you don't, your initiative won't work because he is trading the most gold in this area, and there is no reason for him to come out of the shadows if you don't give him the opportunity. I think they actually ignored my advice, and it didn't work. Anyways, but sometimes you have to hold your nose sometimes with these things, and just because someone was formally dodgy doesn't mean that they should be excluded from the future initiative. We have to be very pragmatic in this sector, and it's not always angels you work with. But if we all get to the end goal of people working in better conditions, working legally, trading legally, and being rewarded for that by a market system that connects to local or global supply chains, I think that's a good outcome. So thank you for spending some time with me to review your questions on artisanal and small scale mining. Again, if I didn't answer your question fully, or if new ones kind of popped up as I was answering them, you just email the administrator of this MOOC, and we can get your questions incorporated in the next cohort. And I think they're posted on YouTube. So have a great day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.